Some exchange betting companies run short-lived promotions, like months-long offers of low commission. At BetDAC, we wanted to change the way we did things, so we set our commission at 2% permanently. That's 2% on football, horse racing, golf, almost any sport. 2%. That's just one way that BetDAC is changing for the better. For the better, like you. BetDAC, the 2% commission exchange.
Over 18s only, please gamble responsibly. Hello and welcome to another special edition of the ROKER Report podcast. And today we are joined by retired journalist, semi-retired?
We'll say semi-retired, Connor.
Yeah, semi-retired journalist Paul Hetherington, who's covered Sunderland from, when did you say you started, 78?
Well, I joined the Evening Chronicle in 1978, succeeding my dad, Len, who'd covered the club for 22 years for the Chronicle. Prior to that, I had 5 years on the Sunderland Echo, but sort of after being sort of covering every Sunderland match home and away for the Chron, I moved on to the Sunday Sun as sports editor, was still involved in reporting, then the Journal as chief football writer, obviously once again heavily involved with Sunderland, and then 30 years ago moved to Manchester. Moved into national newspapers, worked for 3 national newspapers down there. But during that time, throughout that time, I was still involved occasionally, doing Sunderland matches.
Yeah. And who do you cover in Manchester? Normally the 2 Manchester clubs?
My main job, for the last 16 years, I was football editor of the Daily Star Sunday, helping to launch the paper. My main job was to cover England, my main responsibility. But I was heavily involved with all the clubs down there, particularly Manchester United. I seem to have spent the last 16 years of my life either at Old Trafford or Carrington, United's training ground. Particularly heavily involved with them. And that was, great experience because you are dealing with the biggest club in the country. Not the best team in the country at the moment, but definitely the biggest club.
Biggest club in the world, arguably.
Arguably, I think it's them or Real Madrid.
Yeah. So I was going to ask a brief overview of your career, but you've done that. So the first question, really, and it's always a good one, is why are you a Sunderland fan? Right.
I was brought up as a Sunderland fan because of my dad's association with the club, reporting the club. I was actually born, I suppose you could say, the wrong side of the tracks. I was born in North Shields, brought up in Whitley Bay. So I was heavily outnumbered at school by the black and whites.
Same.
Yes.
I'm Blythe. So
okay, well, you know the situation. But I was brought up as a Sunderland fan and attended my first match in 1960 as a fan at Roker Park, Sunderland v Portsmouth. We won 2-0. Now I'm semi-retired. I'm allowed to refer to Sunderland as we. And then became, very passionate about the club as a fan. In my teenage years, I was going to every home game. I was going to a lot of away games, getting up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to get the supporters club coaches from Jarrow. John Tennick used to run those coaches all over the country. It's been very much in my blood since then.
Did you cover the 73 Cup final as a writer, or were you there as a fan?
I was there as a fan. I was a working journalist then. I was actually covering some Sunderland stuff then, doing Sunderland stories then. I was actually had my own freelance business at that time. That's another story. But I went to the final as a supporter with my mum and with my brother Clive, who has kept the family dynasty going by moving into journalism. And Clive is, he's been on the scene a long time now in the North East, freelance journalist, worked for a lot of papers up here. So yeah, I was at Wembley 73. I was there as a Sunderland supporter. And, if you were born when I was born and brought up at that time, the highlight of your Sunderland supporting time was that cup final, which is understandable, of course. Greatest day in the club's history since the Second World War.
And then you obviously would have went to 85.
Yes.
We would have been reporting on that one, I presume.
Yes, that's true. And 92 as well, the Liverpool final. Yeah, so... but 73 obviously was from a Sunderland supporting point of view a magical time, because not only was it probably the most unlikely FA Cup win ever, it was achieved by beating the best teams in the country. It wasn't a question of getting lucky draws or easy draws, or at that time probably the best three teams in the country were Leeds United, Arsenal and Manchester City. And as you know, Sunderland defeated all three, and as they won the cup. And
your dad obviously covered Sunderland.
Yeah.
Is he the inspiration, I suppose, for you and your brother to go into journalism? He must have had good stories for you to want to follow his footsteps.
Definitely, yeah. When I was brought up, obviously every other weekend, my dad was away with the football club for the away matches. I couldn't wait for him to come home and tell me about the match, the trip. Sadly, in those days, more often than not, when he came back, it was after a defeat.
Such as those days, it's these days as well, until this season.
Absolutely. And, I'd be sitting at home on a Saturday afternoon when I was very young, waiting for the results to come through. Usually I used to go around the house slamming all the doors because they'd lost again. But yeah, you're right. My dad was the inspiration in terms of being a Sunderland supporter, and also the inspiration for wanting to go into journalism, and the same applied to my brother Clive.
So what was 1973 like for him?
For my dad?
Yeah.
It was a fantastic experience, as you'd imagine. It was something he never thought would happen. He was used to sort of promotion relegation situations, and more often than not disappointments. And the club took off under Bob Stokoe. My dad had a very good relationship with Bob. Bob was an Evening Chronicle reader. Spent all his life reading the Evening Chronicle. He probably knew as much about my dad as my dad did about him. And when Stokoe took over in 72, he immediately struck up an appropriate word for this programme, a great rapport with my dad. And obviously, that particular time was easily the most exciting time for my dad covering the club, because winning the cup meant they also actually played in Europe, European Cup Winners' Cup. Only 2 matches, Vasas, Budapest and Sporting Lisbon, but that was 2 European trips for my dad as well. So obviously he always remembered those times with great affection.
And then you would have covered Sunderland when Bob came back. So yes. Did you have a relationship with him then from you being younger?
Yes, I knew Bob before he returned to Sunderland. I had some professional dealings with him. I also wrote a book called Sunderland Greats, which was a book which had to be set post-war. And one of the chapters in that, I persuaded Bob. It wasn't difficult to persuade him, actually, just to pick his best post-war Sunderland team of the players he'd played against, and players he'd managed against, and players he'd managed himself. Bob being Bob, I went over to Carlisle to see him. And he said, right, let me think about this for 24 hours. And he was very thorough, very professional about it. Picked his Sunderland, his best post-war Sunderland team. Explained why certain players were left out, why certain players were selected, why certain players might have seemed to be out of position. For instance, you had Colin Todd at right back, because his 2 centre-backs just had to be Charlie Hurley and Dave Watson. So where do you put Colin Todd? You put him right back.
So your brother covers North East football. Your dad was a journalist. Your partners must have hated Christmas dinners because you must have just spoke about football the whole time.
Yeah, that's true. My wife, Sue, has got used to it up to a point. She still doesn't totally get it. She should do. She's from Sunderland. And her dad, George Gale, he was not a journalist, but he worked at the Sunderland Echo. So, she should understand it. And but you're right, in terms of the conversations, my dad and I and Clive, we often used to, sadly my dad died in 1998, but we, when he was alive and well, the three of us loved going for a pint or two or three or more and discussing all things football, but in particular all things Sunderland.
We had Alan Durban on the podcast at the weekend, and you apparently had a good relationship with him. So what was he like? Because I met him the other day and he's quite a character, but I'm sure you have plenty of stories. In fact, what's your favourite Alan Durban story? I'll put you on the spot.
My favourite Alan Durban story, which I can tell on air. I'll tell you what, this is a slightly funny story, this one. And it doesn't really directly involve Sunderland, but when Alan lost his job at Sunderland, he returned to the game as manager of Cardiff City. And the day he was appointed, he met me for a celebratory drink in Newcastle. There was three of us actually, went out for a drink, myself, Alan, who was still living in the northeast at that time at Yarm, and John Richardson, another well-known journalist, good friend of mine. John worked up here for the Journal and worked for numerous other papers after that, the Sun, the Daily Mail, the Sunday Express. And the three of us went out to celebrate with Alan that he's returned to football. The next day he was actually travelling down to Cardiff to be unveiled. The reporter on the South Wales Echo at the time, my sort of oppo down there, was a guy called Joe Lovejoy, who became better known later on in his career at the Sunday Times. And Alan was actually round in my flat at the time in South Gosforth. Joe just happened to ring me up and he said, your mate Durbs has got the Cardiff job. I said, yeah, I know that. He says, is there any way at all I could get a hold of him? I said, yeah, hang on, I'll put him on. And I handed the phone to Alan Durban and I said, Joe Lovejoy, South Wales Echo, just give him an interview. And so Durbs answered all Joe's questions. The phone was passed back to me and Joe said, I just can't believe that. And he said, that's the easiest exclusive I've ever had in my life, thanks very much. But Alan Durban was a great character. He was also a good manager. I found him very good to deal with. As a manager, very thorough, very professional. Made sure he got things organised at the back defensively to start with. He built a good young team at Sunderland. You think about Barry Venison and Nick Pickering, and he brought through, and then he added players like Paul Bracewell, Mark Proctor to the mix. When he eventually realised he needed a bit of experience and a bit of flair, he brought in Frank Worthington, he brought in Leighton James, and Alan was close to getting it right. Those were times of struggle, but I believed he was very much on the right lines. And he got sacked basically after they'd lost an FA Cup tie, and I felt that was a wrong decision. The club should have stuck with him.
And we obviously said he built a very good team, but was the sacking of Alan the reason why we got pretty much double relegated in the years to follow? I mean, there's other factors, obviously. You can talk about Lawrie McMenemy, who we will bring up, but... Yeah,
Sunderland replaced Alan with Len Ashurst, who, of course, had a great association with the club. I think he made over 400 appearances for the club, Len, as left back. And Len totally changed things, and he put the emphasis at that time on bringing in he had this thing about pace, and he brought in as many quick players as he could think of. You know, I'm off the top of my head, Gary Bennett was brought in to play at centre-half, Howard Gale, David Hodgson, players like this. And initially, it worked. I have to say, initially it worked. They obviously got to a cup final. But after that, things fell away badly. And I think you're right. In terms of a slippery slope, they were on it for the next few years after they sacked Alan.
What was Tom Cowie like? Alan pretty much said he had an okay relationship with him, but it ended up going sour. But he's a figure that's very divisive. People generally don't like him. I think that's fair to say. But what was your sort of dealings with him? Did you think he was a good chairman, a good person? How did you feel about him?
He tried to be a good chairman. You would imagine he would try to be a good chairman. He had great ambitions. He was determined to deliver a top manager to Sunderland. You know, he tried to get Brian Clough. He tried to get Bobby Robson. He did appoint Alan. And eventually, of course, Lawrie McMenemy, who'd been another long-standing target, came in. Tom Cowie was bemused why, despite all his best efforts, results just weren't good enough. And I think a few people who've been involved at Sunderland over the years have had a similar feeling. So when you look back at that particular time, the Cowie era was not a success. But to be fair to him, it wasn't for the want of trying or for the ambition he had. You know, he was a very successful businessman. And he thought that he could bring that business acumen into football. He wasn't the first chairman to find it's not as simple as that. And
Lawrie McMenemy, how did you find him? Obviously, that went disastrously, to say the least. But why did it go so bad? I mean, it's been talked about many times, but I would be interested to hear your opinion on it.
Yeah. See, once again, Lawrie, I knew Lawrie well before he became manager of Sunderland. He did a remarkable job at Southampton. I thought, like most people did, that this was a great appointment. Lawrie had a formula at Southampton of signing a lot of proven, experienced top players. But what tended to happen was once he'd done the groundwork there and he had his team in place, he'd add a top player, then add another one. He wasn't adding a lot all at once. And at Sunderland, he tried to implement that formula at Sunderland, bringing in a lot of experienced players, and they just didn't gel for whatever reason. And Lawrie, I think once again, Lawrie was somebody else who couldn't understand why things weren't going better than they were, really. And results just weren't good enough. The crowd quickly became disillusioned. Once a crowd turns on a manager, as you know, it then becomes very difficult to turn things around. There was a huge feeling of being let down, anticlimax. There was a lot of attention placed on the amount of money the club were paying Lawrie at the time. I mean, by today's standards, it doesn't look a lot, but at that time, by those standards, it was a lot. And it just didn't work for Lawrie, and they stayed up by the skin of their teeth in his first season there. It's quite an interesting story, actually. On the Saturday that Sunderland stayed up, the next night, on the Sunday, it was the North East Football Writers' Dinner in Durham. I was chairman. Few weeks before the function, Lawrie pulled out, told me he wouldn't be able to make it. I was absolutely convinced that he was going to be the main speaker as well, because he was a terrific speaker, after dinner speaker. And he pulled out, and it was quite clear to me that he pulled out because the results were so bad, and he was worried about the reception he would get in a dinner which the majority of people in the room were Sunderland supporters. I then had the problem of finding a substitute guest speaker at relatively short notice. I got Tommy Docherty to come and do it. I used my good friend Mick Docherty, of course, someone else with a great Sunderland association, Tommy's son. Mick persuaded Tommy to come and do it, even though that day he was at Hampden Park for a testimonial match for Kenny Dalglish. And Tommy, immediately after the match at Hampden, had a driver who brought him down to the Three Tons at Durham for the dinner. And so Tommy was the guest speaker that night. Sunderland won on Saturday to stay up. There was that famous scene of Lawrie walking around the pitch waving a white flag at the crowd. Sunday morning, I get a phone call from Lawrie. Paul, things have changed. I'll be able to come to the dinner tonight. I says, okay, great. Come along. Delighted to see you. But you realise you won't be the main guest speaker. You'll be coming as manager of Sunderland on the top table because I've had to replace you. He said, oh, all right, okay then. So he seemed a bit disappointed, actually.
Yeah.
I think he fancied the stage after a good day the day before. Anyway, he rolled up at the dinner. And I said, right, now you're here, I want you to sing for your supper. And he says, what do you mean? I said, well, I've got a presentation tonight to Bishop Auckland, your old club. I want you to do that. We ended up having a brilliant dinner because Tommy Docherty was terrific and very funny. And Lawrie got up, made a great presentation to Bishop Auckland and also spoke very well and also obviously touched on Sunderland and how they'd managed to turn it round and his hopes for the next season. But, of course, things didn't improve the next season. And once there's problems, once things are going in the right direction in football, it's very hard to turn it round.
Denis Smith, pretty well-liked figure in Sunderland, obviously 2 promotions with him. What was he like when he came in and how did he change things? Was it kind of like what we've had this year where you get a clean slate, it was a new owner as well, or did he do something else?
Denis was the perfect appointment at the time. Because he understood the division Sunderland were in, which obviously is the same division they're in now. It's only twice in the history that's happened. Denis knew the division, knew what was needed, looked at what he'd inherited, and decided, there were some players there, particularly Eric Gates, who he could keep. And he believed get the best out of him and bring in players who he felt were perfectly suited to that division. His big signing was Marco Gabbiadini. Gabbiadini and Gates produced a lot of goals and they were a great combination. John McPhail, another player that Denis knew very well, he brought him in to play at centre-half. He was a goal-scoring centre-half, very good penalty taker from memory. Denis understood what was required to get promotion. Good manager, and he did a great job. I still see Denis occasionally. He lives not far from me. He's obviously at Stoke. I'm probably about 40 miles from actually where I live in the Manchester area now, North Cheshire. I'll always look at that particular time with fondness and affection, for Denis, who was a good manager, and that was the time I launched my book actually, and Denis was one of the guys who came along on the night to support the launch of the book at Roker Park. Bob Murray wrote the foreword to that. Jimmy Montgomery came along that night, Brian Pop Robson, and I had a great night. I was grateful to Denis for his support and backing. And as somebody who cared about Sunderland, always has done, always will, still does, I was grateful to Denis for what he did for the club because I thought he was an excellent appointment and an excellent manager.
And the final thing really I want to touch on from your time covering Sunderland was the Swindon playoff final.
Yeah.
I was talking to Bob the other day and he swears he was the only one who knew that Sunderland were going up irrespective of the result. But what do you remember of that day and sort of the week that followed where, they lost the final but then they ended up going up? Did you have a feeling they were going to go up?
Do you mean before the match itself?
Before the match, did you think no matter what the result they were going to go up? Because if I remember rightly, it was Newcastle had a claim, and I can't remember who the relegated team from the top division was.
Yes.
But 3 teams had a claim, and Sunderland
Yeah,
ended up winning.
I mean, Sunderland had defeated Newcastle, hadn't they, in the playoff semi-final to get there. So I couldn't quite follow Newcastle's claim.
Just because they finished 3rd.
Yeah.
They were the highest place finish.
Yeah, so, okay, fair enough. That was obviously why they thought they might have a case, which was reasonable. I think as Sunderland had actually got to the final, Sunderland felt their claim was stronger. Did I think Sunderland would beat Swindon that day? Yes, I did. The match itself was very much an anticlimax from a Sunderland point of view. They didn't play well enough on the day. I thought Swindon were the better team. From memory, passed the ball better. And was I convinced that Sunderland would still go up regardless because of the Swindon situation? No, I wasn't convinced at all. No. It was a massive bonus, and for once Sunderland got lucky, if you like, and it's not often that's happened in my time.
What was it like when you found out? How did you find out that it was, they were going to get promoted? And obviously that's a big change for you as well, because you're going to top division grounds now and not second division grounds. Yeah,
that's true. I don't know. The story was evolving. And it was clear that Swindon would not get the promotion place. So I think it eventually became clear that they weren't going up. It was a question of who would. It then became sort of felt at the time that Sunderland were probably the favourites to get that place. And in terms of how did I find out? I mean, there was lots of stories running at the time that this was now looking likely, and of course there was then the official announcement which confirmed it, and then it was a question of, right, well, we're moving up a division, but will we be able to handle it? We haven't been quite good enough to win promotion outright, either through a playoff final or through a league position. So. But anyway, you get up and you worry about that once you're there, don't you?
Some exchange betting companies run short-lived promotions, like months-long offers of low commission. At BetDAG, we wanted to change the way we did things, so we set our commission at 2% permanently. That's 2% on football, horse racing, golf, almost any sport. 2%. That's just one way that BetDAG is changing for the better. For the better, like you. BetDAG, the 2% commission exchange.
Over 18s only, please gamble responsibly. Right, I want to jump to Peter Reid. So, Bob, the other day, I mentioned your name with Peter Reid, and he gave you some of the credit, a lot of the credit, to be fair, connecting Peter with Sunderland. So, how did that come about? How did you end up recommending Peter for the job and Peter getting the job? And what was the story behind that? The
story behind that was that Bob and I used to meet up occasionally for lunch. I'd moved to Manchester. We would meet up periodically, usually in Manchester or Leeds, for a lunch, have a chat. On one or two occasions, I'd interview him for the paper. I was on the News of the World at that time. Other times, we would just meet up and have lunch, chew the fat, have a glass of wine. I remember taking Bob and Sue with my wife to the Savoy for dinner at a football writers' tribute night as well. We got on well. We were in regular contact. As I say, Bob kindly wrote the foreword to the book I did. And we were having lunch in a restaurant in Manchester called Harper's. The restaurant's still there. It's no longer called Harper's. It's no longer the same restaurant. But this was a real football haunt in Manchester. It was run by a Spanish guy called Felix, who was actually brought to Manchester by George Best when Bestie was opening nightclubs, bars, restaurants. He was in his pomp, his heyday. And he brought Felix over to run the restaurant. Felix survived, the restaurant survived, Bestie didn't. But coincidentally, a few weeks before I'd been in Harper's with Bob, I'd been in with Reedy. And Reedy at the time was player-coach at Man City. And we'd had a general chat about things. Anyway, over lunch with Bob, Bob kind of indicated to me that Mick Buxton, who was manager at the time at Sunderland, his position was, how can I put it, was under review. Results weren't quite good enough. The club was stagnating, wasn't really going anywhere. So Bob said to me, if we were to make a change managerially, who would you recommend? I said, Peter Reid. He went, it's an interesting one. He said, why? I said, well, I think Peter Reid would galvanise the place. He's brilliant in the dressing room. He'd get the best out of what you've got. He'd lift the crowd as well as the team. And Bob said, do you think Reid would take it? I said, he would take it like a shot. He would, he wanted, put it this way, Reid talked to me a lot about playing for Bolton, in particular at Roker Park, in front of 50-odd thousand people in the fantastic atmosphere. And Peter was actually very interested in the whole Sunderland situation. Saw it as one of the most exciting jobs in the country. Just to recap there slightly, when I said he was player coach, the first time I went to Harper's actually with Peter, he was player coach at Man City. He later became the manager and had lost his job, so he was available. Yeah. He was out of work. Let's clarify that. Anyway, a few weeks later, I got a phone call on a Monday night from Bob saying, we've decided to make a change. We've had a board meeting. We're very interested in Peter. Can you get in touch with him and ask him if he'll come for an interview? So I then had the hard job on a Monday night of tracking Reedy down, who was out and about in Manchester somewhere. I rang everyone I knew who knew him. We eventually found him. He rang me back. Reedy rang me back. It was something like midnight on the Monday night. And he said, you're chasing me? And I said, yeah. I said, you've got an interview for the Sunderland job tomorrow. And he went, right, where have I got to be? Who am I seeing? What's happening? You know, so I said, it's in Sheffield. And
Sheffield
was on
the.
I think the director who actually met him was Graham Wood, and I think he was living over there, that area. So that was the initial meeting. Things went from there. Reedy was appointed, and Peter's got a book out at the moment. He actually does sort of mention that he got a call from me telling him that the Sunderland job could well be his. So that was sorted out, and it was something which worked very well for the best part of 7 years.
Did you get an agent fee? Sounds to me like you were an agent there.
I did not get an agent fee.
You should have asked.
The daft thing was I was the first one to know that Reedy was getting the job, and I was probably the last one to write it because I was on the Sunday paper then. Well, I was on Sunday papers most of my career eventually, but I was on the News of the World then. This all happened in midweek. I knew chapter and verse what was going on, and I couldn't write a word because I had to wait for Sunday to do anything about it, by which time Peter had been installed in the job. So I came up for the press conference at Roker. After the press conference was all over, Reedy and I went for a drink, and he gave me an interview. And we're still in touch. I was with him just a couple of weeks ago at the Football Writers' Dinner in Manchester. Actually spoke to him last week because he was up in the northeast last week. He was at the game on Saturday. He rang me when he was up here. Wanting a phone number for somebody up here, and he actually said then, let's have lunch soon.
Fair play. What was your relationship like with Bob Murray then?
My relationship with Bob was very good. The great thing we had in common was a passion for Sunderland Football Club. We haven't spoken for a long time, which is something I regret. Maybe Bob does as well. We didn't exactly fall out, but when Sunderland eventually sacked Reedy, I was in Bratislava at the time with England for a match, and it was quite clear the writing was on the wall for Peter. He was sacked, and Howard Wilkinson was replacing him. And while I obviously, respected the club's right to change a manager, even though the manager was a friend of mine and I'd been kind of instrumental in him arriving at Sunderland, I did understand that, results, had fallen off. And if the club felt a change was necessary, then that was their right to do that. At the time, I did not agree with Howard Wilkinson replacing him.
History has proved you right.
And I rang Bob and told him from Bratislava. I made the call from Bratislava, and he said, I was dreading this call. He said, I knew you'd be on. And I said, look, Bob, I'm not so much ringing up to say I disagree with the sacking of Reid. I said, I just can't understand why you're replacing him with Howard Wilkinson. Because I said, Howard has done some great things in his career, been very successful. But I said that was a few years earlier. And in my opinion, Howard managerially at the time was yesterday's man. And I told Bob that. And Bob said, he's the last Englishman to win the league title. And I said, I'm aware of all that. But I said, I don't think you made the right appointment there. And we kind of agreed to disagree. And that, we've then sort of gone our separate ways in a way. But I still have great respect for Bob. And certainly he got more right at Sunderland than he got wrong.
Yeah. And what about Peter? How was your relationship like with him? Back to when did you first meet him?
With Reid?
Yeah.
Well, I knew Reid as when he was a player. I mean, but I was very friendly with Howard Kendall, and when Howard became manager of Man City, he brought Peter as player coach. So I got to see a bit more of Reid, got to know him better, realised what great company he was, a very passionate football person, obviously, and we became sort of in touch on a regular basis, really. I used to speak to him most weeks, phone calls, the sort of phone calls journalists make, check calls, see what's going on. And obviously my dealings with him increased when he became manager of City. And as I say, we're friends, we're still in touch now. He's one of those people you want to go out for lunch with, really, because it's good fun. And there's a few bottles of wine get demolished in the process, I'll tell you. But he's someone with very strong opinions, and we have great debates. We have a big laugh, and he's just a super guy, really. And I'm pleased that things obviously went a little bit sour for him at the end at Sunderland. That's all down to results, because the results govern everything. But he's always wanted to come back in some shape or form. And on one or two occasions, it might have happened. It almost happened. But certainly the fans, I think, when they look at the Reid era, if you like, 2 7th place finishes in the top flight, the Premier League, they remember him with great affection. He's always very welcome up here at Supporters Club dues and gets a great reception, and rightly so.
You said something there, which I'm not going to ask for an exact date, but you said he might have come back a couple of times. Do you mean as a manager?
He certainly would have come back as a manager. I think he thought he was going to come back on the staff under Sam Allardyce.
Right, because Allardyce obviously they get along.
Yeah, when Big Sam got the job, really hoped that Sam would bring him back as part of the staff, and really would have been happy to come back as assistant manager or whatever title Big Sam wanted to give him. He wasn't of a mind that he had to be manager. He just wanted to come back and be involved in Sunderland Football Club and help the club and support Sam. And that, I think Sam, well, I'm certain Sam thought about it. What Sam eventually decided to do was retain the staff. Paul Bracewell and Robbie Stockdale. He decided to keep them, and obviously things went well that season, didn't they? Ended up very good, very positive. I know I actually had a chat with Sam about it, and Sam's view in his mind was that Reid is a manager. He is a number one, not a number two or a number three or whatever. So it didn't happen. Certainly on one or two other occasions, there's been so many managerial changes at Sunderland. I know Reid was always pretty high up in the betting to return. It became generally known, I think, certainly in my business journalistically, that he'd love to come back to the club. And given his record, I think the club did consider him on one or two occasions, although decided not to go in that direction. But probably the closest he felt he might have been to a return was when Sam was manager.
Did it surprise you to see how well Peter did at Sunderland? And I don't mean surprise in like a nasty way. I mean it in the sense of he came into a club that was about to go in the third division.
Yes.
They moved into the stadium, the academy, finished seventh. Did it surprise you how well it went? No.
I thought he would be what they needed at the time. He did exactly what I said he would do. He galvanised the dressing room. He got the team organised. He created a terrific team spirit. They stayed up. That was his first job. The fans obviously took to him. He even made a record about him, of course. And things started rolling. The club was on a roll. I know there was a one relegation, setback, but even those days, were exciting immediately after that, when probably limited resources and everything else, they went down from the top flight. Last day of the season, wasn't it? Defeat, which sent them down. They almost stayed up, almost against the odds. But the club took off again when they moved to the Stadium of Light, because ROKER Park, fantastic old ground that it was in its heyday. When I first went there, I was there with 60,000 people in the ground. Obviously, by the time the ground closed, it was down to about 17,000 or something like that.
23.
23 was the capacity.
But it was never ever sold out.
No, they were getting crowds of 17, 18, things like that, weren't they? And they moved to the Stadium of Light, a new stadium, the bigger crowds, more revenue being generated, good signings being made, and a team which played with style. Everyone will always remember the Phillips Quinn combination, Summerby and Johnson on the wings. The crosses flying in, those two getting on the end of them, and even when they needed two goes at coming back after that relegation, obviously there was a playoff final defeat, one of the most remarkable matches.
Did you go?
Ever. I was in America on holiday at the time, and I had a holiday booked well in advance, and so I didn't go to that one. I rang up to find out what the result was and couldn't believe it. The circumstances in which they'd lost. But even that was obviously was a very exciting season. The following season was successful, and then the way they did in the Premier League, I suppose that was a big leap forward, wasn't it? 2 7th place finishes. But as I say, I wasn't surprised because I had a good team and a terrific team spirit, and the club was on a roll. I remember at one stage in one of those seasons, they actually climbed as high as second in the Premier League.
I think we played Manchester United first v second, I believe, in 2001 maybe.
Yes, yeah.
But as a journalist based in Manchester at the time, what was the view of Sunderland at that time? Because, they were a club, brand new stadium, one of the biggest in the country at the time, constantly in them Champions League places, fell away twice. But at the time, did people think these are the real deal? These will be a top 7 club, for the foreseeable future?
You'd be surprised how much interest I have found there is in Manchester in Sunderland. Both United and City, sort of people within the club, but also supporters of the two clubs, view Sunderland as a special club. The fans of those two clubs always loved coming up to the northeast. I can go back to Roker Park days, and then of course Stadium of Light days. Now you might say they like coming up because they usually won, but of course that wasn't always the case. And but they liked coming up to what they considered to be a proper football club with good fans and a great atmosphere. And I've always found great interest in Sunderland generally. I mean, obviously people down there over the years have been aware of my association with Sunderland, but quite often now, if I'm at Man United, people like Paddy Crerand, Arthur Albiston will come up to me and say, what about the Black Cats? You know, see, that a good win last week, or what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And there is a lot of interest, a lot of respect for Sunderland's history. There's a lot of respect for Sunderland supporters. You know, the numbers in which they turn up even in times of struggle. Yeah. And particularly fantastic. Sunderland have always had, as you know, fantastic away support. And, you know, the clubs in Manchester have, as I say, huge respect for Sunderland. And at that particular time, in answer to your question, Connor, about the 2 7th-place finishes, the view down there was, wow, Sunderland are heading back to where they should be. They're a good team.
And I suppose with that, we also have to kind of analyse where it went wrong. So I think people often point to Niall Quinn finishing up. I think there's other factors. I think recruitment was poor. But where do you think it went wrong for, I suppose, Peter and Bob Murray at Sunderland?
Yeah, it became hard to sort of sustain that level without, they needed even greater investment, I would say, in the squad. And I suppose it was a time when there was more and more foreign ownership of football clubs, and owners pumping in more money than other clubs like Sunderland had available. I think they got sort of slightly left behind a bit, and then we had this sort of almost season after season after Peter of these, you know, Great Escape type seasons when we're fighting for survival. And what really frustrated me was, you know, I really felt the club had something going again when Sam came in. I thought that was a great appointment. From the end of January of that season he was in charge, when the transfer window closed, the squad had been strengthened. You know, the 3Ks, Kone, Kazri, Kirchhoff came in with specific jobs to do, which they did well that season. And between the end of January, end of the season, Sunderland's form was the 8th best in the Premier League. And there were some memorable matches, of course, fantastic results. The club was on a high at the end of the season. There was huge optimism. I then went off to France to cover England at Euro 2016. And when England lost to Iceland and Roy Hodgson immediately quit, I thought to myself, this is going to be bad news for my club, because I am convinced the FA will go for Big Sam, and I am convinced he will take that job. And I spoke to Sam shortly after Euro 2016. He was on holiday in Spain. He was preparing for the new season as manager of Sunderland. And I said, what about England? He said, they haven't been in touch yet. I says, they are going to be in touch. He said, well, maybe. We'll see. I said, so what happens when they get in touch? He says, you know something? He says, can't quote me on this at the moment. But he said, that's the one job I would leave Sunderland for. He said, I've looked at all the club options. He said, I am not going to get a better job in club football than this now. He said, you could maybe argue Everton, which of course he later went to, because he said there might just be more money available there to spend on players. He says, I'm not going to get Man United, I'm not going to get Man City, I'm not going to get Liverpool, I'm not going to get Spurs, I'm not going to get Arsenal, I'm not going to get Chelsea. So he said, Sunderland, fantastic. big club, great support. He said, I'm not going to get a better job than this unless it's England. And he says, if it's England, he said, I could not possibly turn that down. And of course, just when things were going right, things went wrong again. And the last 2 seasons prior to this season, you know, like all Sunderland fans, I can't believe how bad things have been. Because when you lose Sam, I thought the best possible replacement perhaps was David Moyes.
Same.
Yeah, I was happy to see Moyes come in. The day Moyes took charge and he went to a pre-season friendly at Rotherham, he sent me a text saying, we'll be climbing up the league. And, well, that didn't quite go according to plan, did it? Mm-hmm. And, I mean, so much went wrong that season. And, you know, I have to say, as much as I like David, and I do think he's a decent manager, he got off on the wrong foot.
It was the Middlesbrough game.
Yeah.
You'll remember the quote where he pretty much just said we're in a relegation fight.
Yeah, and he didn't need to say that. He argues he was being honest, and I suppose you could say he was proved right. But he didn't need to say it. It sent the wrong signal. It created the wrong mood about the whole place, probably in the dressing room, definitely among the fans. And things that season just went from bad to worse, and I couldn't believe how, you know, the way things were going. You know, there was a team in place when at the end of that season under Sam, and that team didn't last long, did it?
No. You could have brought Jan and Via back.
I know.
I could sit here all day to be honest.
Well, I know.
But it was Sam kept... What was weird about him is he kept players fit. Kirchhoff literally never fit his whole career, but he had him fit. Yeah. Moyes comes in, not fit. What was Sam doing? How can he keep a player fit and other managers can't?
Sam is a master of managing players with injuries. Basically, don't bother training.
Yeah. He did that with Andy Carroll, didn't he, as well?
Don't bother training, you know. And I think Moyes had an idea that everyone had to train the same and had to train at a very intense level. And Kirchhoff soon broke down.
He's made of glass.
You know.
He always was.
Yeah. But Sam just managed that injury problem. I mean, when Sam signed Kirchhoff, he went to watch him. He was at Bayern Munich at the time, but not in the team. Getting the odd game. But Sam went over to Germany to watch Kirchhoff, watch Bayern Munich play on a Sunday, and Kirchhoff didn't play. I think he was on the bench and didn't even get on. So Sam didn't see him. So Sam spoke to Pep Guardiola, who was manager of Bayern at the time, went to watch Bayern train the next day. He actually went to watch Kirchhoff train and liked what he saw in training. You know, managers often place great store on what they see in training, and it influences decisions. Certainly influences team selection. Certainly, what Sam saw that day of Kirchhoff persuaded him he could do a job for him. And then, having said all that about training, he then made sure he didn't overtrain, didn't train too much to keep him fit. So that worked. Moyes didn't like Khazri.
Yeah.
Took against him straight away, questioned his fitness, and the team started to break up. And a new team was, I mean, Umvia was a big miss. They had this attitude that they were going to sign him for nothing when he was out of contract. Didn't work out, of course. They'd have been far better off just spending some of the money. Well, Moyes had 30 million to spend when he replaced Sam, and he had to decide, because I talked to him about this. He had to decide whether to make one big major signing, splash 30 million on one, you know, flagship signing, or bring in a number of players to increase the squad strength, depth. Decided to go sort of numerically, if you like, rather than the one big signing. I think the one big signing at the time he was looking at was Christian Benteke,
who ended up at Palace.
Yes.
Probably wouldn't have worked, to be fair.
Yeah, well, he was thinking Benteke and Defoe as a pair.
Yeah.
You know,
it's
maybe.
got something to it.
Maybe. So I think probably. But he brought in a number of players. Some of them were good signings. You can't say Paddy McNair wasn't a good signing.
Yeah, it was all right.
You know, I thought Januzaj was a great signing, even though it was a loan.
Yeah, it didn't really, didn't fit.
It just didn't work at all. He was a huge disappointment at Sunderland, Januzaj, unfortunately. And, relegation, okay, well, things can't get any worse. Moyes, as you know, fell on his sword. He quit.
He left the club the money, though, didn't he?
Sorry?
He didn't take any money.
No, he wrote off his contract effectively, walked away from it to his credit. And they made what I thought was another good appointment in Simon Grayson, someone else I know very well, who's got 4 promotions on his CV.
Really nice guy as well.
Nice guy. Done a good job at Preston the previous season in that division. Knew what he wanted. I thought that appointment would work. They started reasonably well, didn't they? Then fell away.
Yeah, I think got 5 points
first 3 games, and then they just couldn't win at home, could they? And in fact, they couldn't win.
Even from you won 1 game.
Good positions, and lost his job. I still believe if they'd kept Simon, they'd have stayed up. I do believe that, but because he lost his job after failing to beat Bolton Wanderers at home, and the view then of Ellis Short was, well, if you can't beat Bolton Wanderers, you've got no chance. Well, Bolton Wanderers actually stayed up, didn't they?
Yeah.
So, and then Chris comes in, and quite a charismatic guy, said all the right things, made all the right noises, got too many wrong results. There was
a lot of talk with Chris Coleman, wasn't there?
There was a lot of talk. They had a disastrous January transfer window when the policy was proven to be wrong. Let's go for the best young players in the country who can get on loan, rather than getting in players who know this division with a bit of experience.
And the keeper situation.
A bit of steel, the goalkeeping situation. Talking of steel, the goalkeeping situation became a joke. But even with like 6 games to go, they could still have stayed up and should have stayed up.
They're Burton at home. God, Darren Bent.
When you won up, I know. Well, that just had to happen, didn't it?
Yeah.
When you won up at home to Burton Albion in a must-win game.
With 5 minutes left, I think it was.
And you don't even get a point, you lose. So, that was hard to believe what we were all seeing, and very hard to take. So once again, it was start again this season, to bring it up to date, if you like.
I know.
But of course, it's all been positive. The ownership had to change. The new owners have come in.
What do you make of the new owners? I was going to ask you this later.
Yeah.
On.
I've had no dealings with them. As I say, I live in Manchester now. Most of my work was there. I've got to say, they've certainly said all the right things, but they've backed it up with the results. They made a very interesting appointment in Jack Ross, which has been a success. I think they got that right. He was the right sort of manager. They needed a hungry, ambitious manager who with a bit of steel in him, shall we say, a bit of fire in him, which I'm certain he's got because he's Scottish. Scottish managers tend to have that. And the recruitment has been pretty good. And they've got something going. They've got, there seems to be a great spirit. The relationship between the club and the fans, it was had broken down.
I wouldn't say it was broke.
Yeah, that's right. It's been repaired, really. Yeah. Averaging over 30,000 in League One. Fantastic away support, selling out every match.
Even a checker trade against Morgan.
Astonishing 1,560, was it 2?
It's not even astonishing, it's just proves how, no offence, how stupid Sunderland fans are, really. In the nicest possible way.
It's a way of life.
Yeah, no.
It's the way it is for the fans. And obviously the next step is to get back go from the 30,000s at home to the 40,000s at home. I know they've already talked about that for the Bradford City game on Boxing Day. Still a big ask, that, but I bet they get close to it if they keep things going. But there's a positive spirit about the club, which is great to see, and it's interesting as well to me that I think there's been 3 real bonuses for Jack Ross this season, and certainly 2, at least 2, but I would say 3. And that he's got players there he didn't expect to have there. They thought Lee Cattermole, Brian Oviedo, and Aidan McGeady would go. I think they were budgeting for those 3 to go. For whatever reason, they all...
McGeady got injured.
Yeah, McGeady got injured. That was a big factor. They couldn't really get him off the wage bill, if you like. So McGeady was still there. Cattermole and Oviedo didn't leave, and those 3 players, they probably complicated Jack Ross's team selections at times when they've been fit and available. But they are 3 players who could still play, in my opinion, in the Premier League. And, certainly at Championship level, high up anyway. And they've strengthened the squad. They've given him 3 more options there at a good level. And now what happens in January, we'll have to wait and see. Let's hope that the squad doesn't break up. Let's hope that the vultures don't swoop. And it's not just a question of will somebody come and offer 4 or 5 million for Josh Madger and make it a difficult decision for the club.
That will contract at the end of the season as well.
Correct, yeah.
Which they need to sort out.
Which would be obviously a factor in the thinking, unless they can get him to sign a new deal. But I also hope that nobody comes in and takes Cattermole, Oviedo or McGeady.
I'm kind of torn on them because from the club's perspective, I know how much of a drain them...
Yes.
But I think Cattermole and Oviedo are particularly... How much of a drain they are to the finances. So I can understand if they got rid of them. Because if they're on together, what, £80,000? That's 10 players at this level. So I can understand if the...
Yeah, I could understand. I could understand the original thinking on it, and I can understand your thinking as well, Connor. I just think that I want Sunderland to have as many good players as possible.
Oh, and exactly. And, me as well, if I'm sitting there in January, if I was playing Football Manager or something, I'll keep them. You would have to think about it. And when they're in the Championship, which there will be, fingers crossed, the end of the season, the wages aren't going to be anywhere near as bad. And
I think McGeady is keeping fit. I think he is someone capable of being a make-the-difference player.
Well, he is. He's already proved it.
Yeah.
Against Plymouth the other week.
Yeah.
I have a question here, and it dates back to 2012. So United lost the title at the Stadium Light.
Yes.
And City, obviously, the Aguero goal. But what did you make of the fact that it was at the Stadium Light, United lost it when they thought it won it, but B, the fury at Sunderland fans celebrating in Manchester United's misery? Because I presume you will have got flack for that.
Yeah, that's true. And there was a lot of anger at that time with Man United about the way Sunderland fans, sort of took the mickey, shall we say. And particularly because of what I said earlier, Connor, as well, there's huge respect in Manchester for Sunderland as a club and for Sunderland supporters, and the United players and the United fans did not take that very well. I think that was just a case of Sunderland fans sort of reacting to the situation on the day, and saying, "Well, we haven't got a lot to shout about and a lot to celebrate, so we'll have a bit of a laugh at that." I also think there's probably more of a bond between Sunderland and Man City than there is between Sunderland and Man United, and that maybe the clubs, but certainly the fans. But what I said about Man United fans, what they think about Sunderland is right in my experience. But I think there's a greater bond between City fans and Sunderland fans. I can remember as a fan going back to 1968, last day of the season, Man United v Sunderland, Newcastle v Man City, league title up for grabs between the two Manchester clubs. I was at Old Trafford as a Sunderland fan. Unbelievably, somehow, Sunderland won 2-1 against Breslau and Charlton, etc. A few days later, these guys are winning the European Cup, beating Benfica. But that day, Sunderland beat United at Old Trafford. City famously won the league at Newcastle, winning 4-3. And when I travelled back on the Sunderland Supporters Club coaches and we stopped off at a service station, on one side of the service station was about 15,000 Sunderland fans, by the way. And on the other side, there's about 15,000 Man City fans. And I remember us all merging together, converging on each other, hugging each other, shaking hands. You know, they were delighted because we'd beaten United, and we were delighted because they'd beaten Newcastle. And I think there's been something between the clubs ever since then. And I think it's been passed on from fathers to sons and everything else. And there's some sort of a link there. There's been a few transfer deals done between the two clubs over the years as well, and I think there is a bond. So, but you're right, United. That was a day when United as a club and United's fans weren't happy with Sunderland.
Where were you that day?
Where was I that day?
Not one of them, surely.
It was a Sunday, wasn't it?
Yeah. 4 o'clock.
It was a Sunday, yeah. I certainly wasn't at Sunderland. I can't remember where I was that day, but I certainly wasn't at Sunderland that day. But I
presume you would have remembered if you were at City as well.
I was, yeah. I've got a feeling I wasn't at a match that day. I wouldn't be reporting a match live as a Sunday paper man. I was probably sitting at home watching Sky Sports or something like that, and watching everything develop everywhere. But yeah, I certainly do remember the reaction up here.
I've got 2 final things. Number 1, were you surprised that Niall Quinn left the club when he did? So that's not as a player, as a chairman.
I was disappointed to see Niall go.
I think everyone, like the club, I think you could pinpoint.
Yeah.
The second question I was going to ask was, what was the biggest mistake Ellis Short made in your opinion? And I think the same question, isn't it? Yeah,
I mean, I think Niall made way, basically, didn't he, for Ellis Short, believing this was a guy to take the club forward and had the resources to do it. I think Ellis Short decided, this is my train set, I'm going to play with it, and I don't need Niall Quinn around now. I think Niall realised that, there was talk of him having some sort of like international role, wasn't there, at the time, in terms of sponsorship or
there was, yeah.
Commercial
there was rumours he was going to
element.
end up at Man City as well.
Commercial element or something, but it was a sad day when Niall left. Niall became somebody absolutely steeped in Sunderland Football Club. Not many people can claim to have done what he has done. In fact, can anyone ever claim to have played for a club, managed a club briefly, and been chairman of a club? And it was obviously at our club. So, it was a sad day when Niall left. I think he decided he wasn't wanted, really. And he better if he moved on. And so should Ellis Short have kept him on and utilised Niall's strengths? Yes, I think he should. I think he should have kept him on as a focal. Even if Ellis Short had kept Niall on as chairman.
Yeah.
He can be the club owner. Fine. You do have clubs where you have an owner, but someone else is chairman.
Yeah.
Look at Chelsea, for instance.
But also think about the fact that he's plunked in Margaret Byrne, Martin Bain, etc.
Yeah.
To be that role, and yet he took Niall Quinn out of it, or sort of forced him out of the role. So it seems odd when he actually was looking for that person the whole time during his ownership. Yeah. And he actually had it there at the start.
A couple of years ago, a great friend of mine, journalist Bob Cass, died. And after Cassie's funeral, which was a memorable occasion, we gave Bob the sort of send-off that he would have wanted. I went into Durham that night to a pub called the Shakespeare in Durham, which is a big Sunderland pub. And because I got a call saying, come over, Niall was in, Reedy was in. There was a lot of Sunderland fans in who had been friends of Bob's. There was a few other people from football. Phil Brown was in, once again a Sunderland fan. And a few journalists, friends of mine. And we went over there and we had a session in there. And I can still remember that as I walked through the door, Niall was carrying a tray with about 20 pints on it over to this table full of Sunderland fans. And as I say, the people in our company. And as I walked in the door, he says, "What are you having?" And I said, "You've got your hands full there, literally." I said, "I'll just get a pint here." No. He said, "Order it up. I'm coming back to get it." And we had a great night in there, and it was a great send off to a great journalist, Bob Cass. But it was also a night which just illustrated to me, the link between Niall Quinn and Sunderland. And I wish Niall was still involved in the club. Sorry?
Do you think he'll ever come back?
I don't think so now. Because how would you fit in with the Stuart Donald regime now?
Yeah, there's always room to have somebody. Even if they're not directly involved. Somebody who's just around the club a bit more, because he's went from being, well, most fans think he's the best thing since sliced bread. Why not have him around the club a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I'd certainly be happy to see Niall around the club, no doubt about that.
Okay, well, I think we're all done here. I kept you for, we ran 10 minutes over what I said, so that's good for me.
No problems.
Yeah, normally we're over. So thanks, Paul, for coming on. It's been interesting to hear your story, I suppose. I kind of call these oral histories.
Yes, okay, fine.
Yeah, that's what I said to Bob anyway. I was like, it's not a podcast, it's an oral history.
Very good.
And I think he bought that more. So.
Okay, great stuff. Well, listen, thanks for having me on, Connor. I've greatly enjoyed it. It's never a problem for me to talk about Sunderland Football Club.
Cheers for coming on.
Pleasure.
Some exchange betting companies run short-lived promotions, like months-long offers of low commission. At BetDAG, we wanted to change the way we did things, so we set our commission at 2% permanently. That's 2% on football, horse racing, golf, almost any sport. 2%. That's just one way that BetDAG is changing for the better. For the better, like you. BetDAG, the 2% commission exchange.
Over 18s only, please gamble responsibly.